Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for being here. It's always a good sign after a break when everyone comes back. So that's a really good gauge, Luigi, that they've come back on a...
Yeah, your people used to suffer, huh?
And so there's a second portion of this. I would encourage during the course on that, if you have some of those questions during the course of this discussion on that, he really does want to look at it as a discussion. But again, if you feel more comfortable at the end, do it. However your comfort is, what I'm trying to do is promote some dialogue between back and forth, because he's got a wealth of experience that we normally don't see in this part of the country. He'll come up here. And I know a few of you spoke to him during the break in terms of talking things, and I don't think he had any cards, but hand him a card. If you don't have any cards, my email was on the flyer. If you want to get his contact info, you send me an email message, and what I'll do is I'll just connect you via email.
Yeah.
They'll be able to do that, and I think he'll continue to be a wealth of knowledge. So with that, Luigi, on that,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let me again echo what Chief just said. I mean, thank you for resisting, being so strong. So, can I ask you a question to start with? Then, I mean, if you keep asking questions, we can share the honorarium together. I mean, I can give you $1 each. And who is the smuggler? Can you come out with a definition? Short definition, possibly. Just feel free. I mean,
A person who assists, could be an individual or a group of persons to go to one location to another using different means of transportation.
Very good. Do you generally stick to what he said? Yeah, and that actually is the most, as far as I'm concerned, I would say is the most appropriate way to describe a smuggler. And this is exactly the way how it's described by the Palermo Protocol. The Palermo Protocol are the protocols that in 2000s they set up a difference between human smuggling. Well, they distinguish clearly in international law what is human smuggling, what is human trafficking. Now, human smuggling, let me quote, according to the Palermo Protocol, the protocol against the smuggling of migrants, human smuggling is the facilitation in order to obtain directly or indirectly the financial or other material benefit of the illegal entry of a person into a state party of which the person is not a national or a permanent resident. So it's pretty much what you say. This is, according to the Palermo Protocol, basically, this has nothing to do with the moral character of the smuggler. I mean, has nothing to do with it. If you want, I mean, in a couple of words, we can say that a smuggler is a legal logistician. Someone who is, with his logistical skills, managed to infiltrate or to help someone to pass through a border undetected, or, well, in the case of Europe, detected. But this is not what most people hold of human smuggling. According to, popular understanding of human smuggling, they don't stick to what the official definition says human smuggling means. According to politicians, these people put the emphasis more on the moral dimension of the actors more than his logistical skills, or her logistical skills. According to this according to popular understanding of human smuggling, the smuggler is the moral and fellow that doesn't hesitate a second, the reckless criminal who doesn't hesitate a second to toss his human, because he's always perceived to be a man from the global south, like this picture, for example, who's obviously an Arab or anyway Middle Eastern. Doesn't hesitate a second to toss his human cargo at sea or to leave him under the scorching sun of the desert, the Arizona desert, Mexican desert. And well, surprise, surprise. Smugglers had quite a different understanding of themselves. They perceive themselves as, in the course of interviews I had with them, they perceive themselves as moral people, actually as service providers who satisfy the need that cannot be satisfied through legal channels. But they even claim to operate a moral economy by privileging by ethical choices over profit. So they would prioritize, give priority to the transport of their nationals. Syrians would prefer to transport. This is what they say, at least. What they claim, they would transport other Syrians over other migrants. They would guarantee full reimbursement of the smuggling fees if the first, the second, even the third journey turns out to be unsuccessful. So if you get pushed back from Greece to Turkey, then you are entitled to a second and third journey. This is what they say, and it sticks to a certain extent. This is quite true. Anyway, and then they even claim to carry passengers for free sometimes. I mean, special types of passengers, like certain children, friends, relatives, political prisoners, maybe. Well, this is not surprising. I mean, people involved in criminal business often, I mean, you know better than me, often use moral undertones to minimize their involvement in a rather unsavory business. I mean, there is nothing surprising. What is more surprising is that migrants sometimes they confirm what smugglers think of themselves to a certain extent, but they come out with a different definition again of smuggling. To them, smugglers, they mean murderers or saviors. It depends very much on the outcome of the journey. So if the journey is successful, if the smuggler sticks to his promises, well, eventually the smuggler is a savior. Otherwise, he's a criminal, even a murderer. Now it's interesting. There is, I think he's still here. Chief is Slack. What's the name? Is Jeremy Slack. He's still teaching here.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Jeremy Slack and Daniel Martinez carried out a survey with, let me tell you, with 1,100 people, mostly recent deportees in 6 different Mexican cities. It was a quality survey. They were asking them whether they were satisfied about the services of the smuggler. So apparently, what came out was interesting because 75% of them they were saying, yes, I'm satisfied. Even though only 45% of them they say that they would have suggested to use the same smuggler to their friends and relatives because probably they don't assume they want to take on the responsibility. But what's interesting here is that 75% say they were okay. They were actually satisfied. So, all this to tell you what? That the figure of smuggler is, you know better than me, is difficult to pin down. Precisely because border is a very complex scenario. I mean, and in this scenario, define the interaction between smugglers and migrants. And this interaction is eventually what contributes to define the smuggler, whether as a savior or as a criminal, at least to the migrant's eyes. Now, there are different, of course, factors that define the interaction between smuggler and migrants. One of them has to do with the inner disposition of the smuggler. I mean, there are people that are truly evil and they don't care about human lives. But there are also other factors, the external factors. One of them is that the policies implemented, border policies. These affect the interaction between smuggler and migrants. And this is what I want to talk today. I mean, to this my section, but this last section will mostly revolve about that. So, to start with, especially in Europe, in the Mediterranean, human smuggling is a business of trust. I mean, it's a relation of trust. Migrants and refugees are not only victims of the smuggler, as the survey carried out by Slack and Martinez showed, but they are also, smugglers are actually, are a valuable resource for migrants. They only escape from a situation of misery and danger. So, I mean, of course, picking up the right smugglers is not easy. The one that doesn't seek your boat, the one that doesn't leave you on the desert, alone in the desert. And during the journey, especially on the US-Mexican border, I mean, the migrants are very much at the mercy of the smugglers. Having said that, smugglers themselves depend on migrants. Because if we want to use a business model, to frame human smuggling, well, we have also to accept the fact that as any other business, smuggling requires a great deal of trust. So successfully smuggled migrants, they can operate as pull factor by tempting their kin, friends, and relatives to embark on similar journeys using the same smuggler. This is what happened, for example, This is what happened to a guy, Muhammad. This guy got asylum in. He was from Syria, got asylum in Italy. When I asked him, "Are you satisfied?" Pretty much like what Jeremy Slack and Martinez did. Are you satisfied about smuggling? He said, "Look, Luigi. Smugglers are no evil, no good. You pay for service and you get what you pay for. Well, in the best manner, not always like that. But it's interesting his story. Why? Because he got smuggled. He reached Europe with his smuggle. Then his family back in Syria applied for asylum for family reunification. Now I cannot tell you how difficult it is to find all the proper documents in a war-torn country like Syria. So they pay something like $8,000 to find all the documents for the family reunification. For some obscure irregularity, their application, family reunification, was rejected. So they stayed there. So what Mohammed did was paying another smuggler, the same smuggler smuggled him in the first place, to have his family smuggled to Italy. They came to Italy, they applied for asylum, and they got asylum. Now, out of 700,000 Syrian refugees who came to Italy, who came to Europe, all of them, they needed the service of the smugglers to get asylum in Europe. But when they tried to get asylum back to their country, they didn't get anything. So it looks like Europe needed the services of the smugglers to do their job, to do its job. So, and this leads to the second slide. You know better than anybody else, so there is no need to tell, but let me tell you because I'm broadcasting. So. Anyway, so we tend to perceive human smuggling in binary terms. On one hand, we have the smuggler. On the other hand, we have the migrant, the victim, and the smuggler is the criminal, which is true in many cases. But the point is not that one. The point is that what most public opinion ignore is smugglers and migrants may be the same person in many cases. Now, during my research, I've seen many people working as many asylum seekers working as a recruiter, for example, because they share the same ethnic background of the main client group of the smuggling group that these people were working for as recruiters. It's all Syrians, for example, help the smuggling group to find other Syrians. They may work as intermediaries by providing a number of services to the smuggling group, working as intermediary between the smuggling group and the migrants and the local communities, because of their long-term engagement with the local communities, because maybe they are stranded in, let's say, in Greece and Turkey for years, and they develop a strong connection with the local community. Or they may work as guides, because they have a first-hand knowledge of the route. Now, they may do that for earning a livelihood, they may do that for for paying the smuggling fees. That was very common. Think about the pilot, those migrants who were piloting the boats. Most of them, they needed to pay the smuggling fees. Now, all this may lead you to think that, the best way to go, let's criminalize everybody, because after all, migrants are criminals, because they ended up working as smugglers. But the point is that in this case, at least in the European case, this is more the criminalization of my regular migration is more the consequence than the cure of this blurring of roles. It's because most of migrants that are stranded in a city, in a place, after a while, because they cannot move, because of the tightening of border control, because moving is more and more difficult, it's increasingly difficult, they get stopped, they get stranded somewhere along the way. They ended up as a negative coping mechanism collaborating with smuggling networks. My case is a bit specific because I'm talking about asylum seekers from Syria. But if not all of the smugglers I interviewed originally were asylum seekers. Some of them, after the EU-Turkey agreement, stopped working as a smuggler, and he became again an asylum seeker. He went to Europe and he filed an asylum claim. To the best of my knowledge, he didn't get it. Didn't got it. And this leads to the third point, which was in part of what we discussed before. What we discussed before, we said in the previous section, we said that smuggling is not managed by large criminal organizations for a number of reasons, the structural differences and high visibility of human smuggling. However, you guys know better than anybody else that there are, along the US-Mexican border, there are migrants who have been forced by drug dealers to carry backpacks containing drugs. So it's not common. And in Europe, there are many people who ended up, many women with the excuse of being deceived under the idea they think that under the idea of being smuggled, they eventually ended up being trafficked and ended up working as prostitutes in Italy or any other cities in Europe. So there is, after all, a connection, right? However, I mean, what is interesting is that more than a market convergence, as we discussed before, more than narco cartels, mafia, or terroristic organizations taking over smuggling networks, is more like a negative coping mechanism put in place by migrants as a way of enhancing their mobility. Now, for example, a research by Sheldon Zhang and Gabriela Sanchez along the US-Mexican border show how most of migrants who carried drug were not forced by drug dealers, but they did it voluntarily. They were intentionally carried out drug, and they did it because many of them they were stranded without money, but they wanted to cross the border, and the only way to do it was working for the drug dealer, because they would have made it easier for you to cross the border. Now it's interesting because there are low barriers to participation. I mean, it's not like you need to be affiliated with a drug cartel to carry, or with a mafia organization to carry out drug. It's very easy. If you want to take on the risks, because obviously this involves risks, but at the same time, it also facilitates your mobility. And this the same goes with human trafficking in the Mediterranean. Many of the people, like, let me tell you, when I did research in Italy, when I did research in Syria, I noticed that most of the exploitation going on among migrants is not carried out by big criminal organizations, but it's carried out by friends, acquaintances, family members. Basically, the people, families, communities displaced by the war have no other alternatives, another option, viable option, than one that can be characterized by exploitation, both in the terms of being exploited and in terms of exploiting. This is, for example, the story of Madi. Madi was a teenager at that time whose need of leaving Syria, was living under the besieged refugee camp of Yarmouk in Syria. He was besieged by Assad's forces and the Islamic State. They were lying for salvation. His need of leaving Yarmouk refugee camp left him with no other option than working for the smuggling organization that helped his family, smuggled his family for free. He didn't want to do that. When I asked Madi also, what do you want to do? I mean, are you happy about that? They say, no, I'm not happy. He was fully aware of the risks of being arrested while working as a smuggler. However, I mean, he didn't have other options. So, I mean, what does this make of Madi? Madi was an exploiter because he entered human smuggling for obvious material benefit. Or was a victim of traffic, a teenager, a minor, who were forced into human smuggling. And the same goes with his boss, the manager of the organization. Was he a savior? Or was he a criminal? He saved Madi's life, and he's probably saved Madi's life and his family's life. On the other hand, he profited of the condition of vulnerability of Madi for his own interest. So, all this leads to the point. That is one of the main conclusions. But let's see. If we have time, I think we have time. Yeah. Let me show you a short video, just to give you an idea of how human trafficking, human smuggling, how the difference, the boundaries between exploitation and solidarity get blurred when things get ugly. This was a documentary shot by Sine Planbeck along the border among Nigerian prostitutes or would-be prostitutes. Let me just spend a few words and just to tell you what happens to Becky. Becky eventually doesn't make it to Italy because when she sees the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, she gets scared and she goes back. On the way back, one of her friends dies. Right, a woman who wanted to deliver a baby, she dies because without any medical attention, left in the desert, abandoned in the middle of the Sahara Desert, she dies. Then Becky made it to back home, but then she wants again to leave. She doesn't know how, but she wants to go to Libya and see a way to go to Europe. In the travel, in the way to Europe, to Libya, I think she dies. Exactly like her friend died, delivering a baby in the middle of the desert. So one of the main conclusions of my research is, and other researchers like, for example, Cinepandex's video or Gabriela Sanchez, many others, shows that exploitation was, in many cases, is consciously embraced by its very victims as a means of enhancing mobility. So, the more border control in Europe please increase, and with the diminishing of legal channels of entry, the likelihoods of being abused and exploited increase substantially. However, this exploitation often is consciously embraced, as I said, as a way of moving. And this is also what's happening along the US-Mexican border with migrants who get entangled with the drug dealers, with the narco cartels, and do the work as mules, because it's the only way for them to move. So, to sum up, what we know is, empirical evidence collected in the Mediterranean and to a lesser extent along the US-Mexico border shows that smugglers provide a service that is in a great demand without necessarily exploiting their clients, although in many cases they do that, of course. Smugglers and the migrants may at times be the same person, and when channels of legal entry diminish, the likelihood of being exploited rise considerably. Now, all this leads to what? So far, let me focus on Europe. It's an effective eradication of these organizations without tackling the root causes of migration. It proved to be ineffective, if not impossible, precisely because human smuggling is deeply enmeshed within migratory flows. So far, the European approach, to a certain extent also the US approach, if I'm not mistaken, has been overwhelmingly focused on implementing a security-based approach. Now, border control plays, as you know, controls play a very important role, a crucial role in restraining human smuggling. Okay, you know better than anybody, the increase and improvement in technology, personnel, and tactical infrastructure has considerably thwarted irregular migration and curb human smuggling. And both in terms of, physical apprehension of irregular migrant smugglers, they get apprehended more easily. And also, we're discussing that yesterday with Chief, also in terms of deterrence. People, they are not really willing to do that if they know they get arrested. Well, one of the problems, and this is like, for example, in Europe we call it the Trump effect. Many migrants, many Mexicans, they don't want to go to Europe, to the US anymore because they know that they with Trump they think they will be kicked out faster. This deterrence effect works, but works to a certain extent. Because it's true that irregular migration is thwarted by the increase in border control and the tightening of border controls in general. But it's also true that human smuggling, at least in Europe, is not a direct function, it's not a direct measure of the number of migrants. It's not necessarily the more irregular migrants we have, the more smugglers we have. In Europe, as we have seen along the Balkan route, when it was open, irregular migrants, 1 million people crossed. Along the Balkan route, when it was open, there was no smugglers. When they closed the borders, smuggling networks start popping up. So, border controls are important. Border control alone, without sound policy measures, they may have a number of undesired outcomes that ultimately outweigh the intended goals of a security-oriented control policy. And now let me focus on Europe because I don't have enough data to speak of the US-Mexican border. I would like to hear your opinion about it. In Italy, there are often security-oriented control policy is very expensive, not only because patrolling a large area like the entire Mediterranean Sea is triggered in huge financial cost. Also because they are also ineffective, because as long as when you block a route, the regular flows gets redirected along a different route. They are dangerous because smugglers, they are aware of moving on hazardous grounds and they employ a variety of techniques in order to escape control. Like, for example, not piloting the boats or managing the migrants remotely. And this is, as we've seen, is also happening to a lesser extent also here. And how do they call it? Cyber coyotes, I think. And third, it can be counterproductive. Not only because, because it generates a protracted condition of illegality that leads migrants to collaborate with smugglers and even with other criminals. And in this case, as we've seen, as in the case of Becky, for example, exploitation became the only way of moving. So they consciously embrace exploitation. They consciously enter more migrants. They consciously enter criminal rings, bigger criminal rings. And this leads also overlapping of smuggling with other criminal activities. Which is, this overlapping, it's interesting, it's not top down. It's not like the kingpin of a drug cartel takes over, or they call it smuggling. It's the other way around. It's migrants who favor the convergence of the two markets because there's a negative coping mechanism. So in Europe, what does it mean? This means that smugglers should be left undisturbed? No, of course no. As I say, border controls are crucial, but in Europe, a combination of policy measures can tackle the issue. Short-term measures, search and rescue people, because anyway, stopping the flow of people in Europe has not led to necessarily to less migrant. Maybe sometimes migrants get redirected. Even if there are less, they're still coming. Medium-term measures, so agreement with third countries on the better enforcement of exit control. You know better than anybody that if you have a good collaboration with the Mexican authorities, you do your job better. And long-term measures, well, in case of Europe, a solution would be a political solution, since many people, like 700,000 Syrian refugees entered Europe. Well, a political solution to the Syrian conflict would definitely help. Also because many of these people didn't want to leave Syria. And the other, there is no a silver bullet, but another very important point that has been neglected so far by European policymakers is that an effective answer to human smuggling would require the EU and state members to concentrate more on reducing the demand of smuggling services, more than only curbing supply. So as long as there is demand, there will be smugglers. And the demand is not a direct measure, as I say, of the number of migrants, but more of the complexity of the journey. Because migrants that can make it on their own, they don't need guides, they don't need coyotes, they don't need smugglers. But migrants that they cannot make it, they need guides. And this is obvious in Balkan route. And that would be all for today. And as far as I'm concerned, but I would like to hear your, what do you think, what will be the silver bullet to curb human smuggling along the US-Mexican border? So let me start with asking you guys a question.
I believe criminally prosecuting would have a great effect of, if there's a consequence, obviously, if you're in prison for the crimes that you're committing, you are not making money. So I believe in prosecution.
All right.
these criminals.
Yeah, I think this is easier in the United States because in Europe, smugglers still are difficult to prosecute because they don't. I mean, they monitor everything remotely. The point is about that is that what happens is that if smugglers keep they ended up following to the European Mediterranean smugglers' footstep here along the U.S.-Mexican border. So how do you prosecute smugglers that you cannot catch because they are doing things remotely?
Uji, in your work here in Tijuana and stuff, has there been any discussions about, you've seen from the guides, anything that would link them or give you an idea that they're trying to do things remotely, guiding remotely, as prevalent as in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I heard rumors because I did an interview in smuggler, and I heard the stories of a few migrants. But mostly, I base these on, apart from what you say today, what you confirmed to me today, but also from the other researchers, like Gabriela Sanchez, who have done extensive research on the Mexican border, or also Jeremy Slack and Martinez. They say that these cyber coyotes are becoming more and more prevalent. Still, it's not the main way of smuggling here, but before they were known, and now there are.
No, with that, Luigi, thank you.
Thank you.